Okay, we are live.
Hi, my name is Eliza, and I'm a high school senior from the San Francisco Bay Area. I co founded Real Talk, which is an organization that seeks to empower youth to engage in civil discourse with empathy, curiosity, and respect.
Inika.
I always forget the order. Hi, my name is Inika Kodestane, and I'm a junior from New Jersey. In addition to being a podcaster, I'm also the co-editor-in-chief of the Next Generation Politics blog, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Isaiah, are you with us or with your sneakers? We'll come back. Madeline.
Hi, my name is Madeline. I'm a high school sophomore from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm extremely passionate about developing a sense of community amongst Gen Z, regardless of where they fall on the political spectrum.
So we'll loop Isaiah back in when he comes, but why don't we turn to you, Eliza?
Today is our first episode in a series that will focus on American national identity. We will be looking at this both from personal perspectives, from domestic perspectives, and also how America plays a role on the international stage in the coming weeks. We wanted to start with this episode about holidays and how what we celebrate reflects our values or doesn't reflect our values, and how we might think about the holidays that we currently celebrate. We wanted to choose this topic because there's this American mythology of inclusion and the United States is a melting pot of belonging. And what we've seen, especially in the recent months, although always throughout American history, it has been apparent that not everybody has been included in that narrative. And so today we wanted to think a little bit together about how we grapple with that reality versus the holidays that we celebrate and how we might incorporate those narratives into our celebrations, especially next week with Thanksgiving. So do we want to start out with Thanksgiving just because it's the closest holiday to where we are now? And I would love to hear from you how you were taught about Thanksgiving initially and if your understanding of the holiday has changed over the years based on what you've learned at school or learned uh, from your family, from the news. How were you informed about this holiday and what it represents?
I guess that I went to public school and I'm still in public school. And in elementary school, it was a very patriotic holiday that was all about celebrating for us. And it was about celebrating our differences. But I think that it was an interesting experience because we weren't necessarily taught the things that I learned later on in middle school. When in sixth grade, my social studies teacher started talking about the violence that occurred as a result of Columbus's explorations to the New World. And that was an idea that I remember it was completely bizarre to me because I had never heard of a single word about any of this violence and war between the native people and the Europeans. And we had multiple lessons every year in middle school about whether we should frame Columbus as a hero or a villain. And I was really excited to frame him as a villain. That was so exciting for me. And because I just wanted to challenge everything that I learned. And now that I'm in high school, I see that people do want to continue framing him as a villain, and some people do want to continue framing him as a hero. But I'm starting to be able to see a middle ground that I wasn't necessarily taught before, because in elementary school, I was all about praising him. And in middle school, I was all about hating him. So I think that as the years went by for me in the school system, I definitely learned more, as I guess you should be able to learn more, but my perspective has definitely been changed and altered based on the information that I was consuming.
Yeah, I pretty much had a similar experience to Madeline. I'm also been in public school my entire life. And I think something else important to note is how Thanksgiving was always framed as like a holiday of cooperation, right? We give thanks for the people we have, we give thanks for um, everything we have on our plate and in our lives, a roof over our head. And I find that it's interesting how the first Thanksgiving is always shown to be like this happy holiday where the Native Americans and the white settlers, they sat down around a table and they overall had like a good time. It was like a nice, happy holiday where these two different groups, put aside their differences and had a productive and like I don't even know how to say it, like a productive and just like overall happy dinner. And obviously that is not the reality. There was a lot of violence, as you mentioned. There was a lot of heartbreaking and like dark truths that were always covered up. And I feel like something that I always remember is like how Squanto was like the Native American that knew English, and he taught the white people how to grow corn and grain and stuff. And that's like the one like thing I can always remember from everything I've learned about Thanksgiving. And it's very interesting how we've carried that narrative throughout our lives, how Thanksgiving is just this time where we can put aside our differences. However, that was not the reality that the first Thanksgiving was built on, and it's what we've built it on since. So we have this very unstable and like falsified foundation that I feel like is starting to crumble now that the realities are being shown.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a great point about the factual inaccuracy underlying the way that a lot of us celebrate this holiday. And I think it's interesting if we follow that forward to how many of our families have maybe celebrated this holiday since we were young. Thanksgiving is associated, for me at least, with practicing gratitude, with visiting my grandparents and cousins, and that really warm family tradition. And I think the way that I would describe it is using a term that is a big theme at my school this year is valuing competing narratives and understanding that there are multiple perspectives that could all reflect our experiences. And I think because of this falsified foundation, as you said, which I thought was a great way of putting it, a lot of people's experiences with Thanksgiving have actually been really positive. But at the same time, if you look at the real history behind the holiday, it's really a celebration of settler colonialism. Uh, and I think those are both accurate reflections of what the holiday means to Americans today. And I think my question is really, how do we grapple with that? How do we make sense of these two very opposing stories and truths about this holiday that we all celebrate, that many of us celebrate?
Well, I think that something that is interesting is that aspects of our culture change with us over time. And I think that Thanksgiving, uh, looking at Thanksgiving in a more modern sense, it's almost it's almost seeming to be less about the event that occurred and more about that idea of gratitude and family and belonging. And although that first Thanksgiving dinner that may have um, started the tradition, or at least that we're told. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm gonna restart that.
It was great. That was super interesting though, Madeline. So keep going with it.
Yeah, okay. So although the idea of the holiday may have started with the natives and the Europeans meeting and exchanging cultures, whether that be in a positive way or in a negative way, I think that in a larger sense, that's not really what we're celebrating anymore, if that even was what we were celebrating to begin with. Because I think that it's just been a part of American culture, something that is just so strong about America, as opposed to the act of finding this new land and interacting with new people. So I don't really think that we need to, I don't think that we need to have that struggle actually between these two ideas, because it kind of comes to a point where like the two alternate universes kind of collide into one for science fiction fans. So I think that's an interesting idea, but I'd love to hear everyone else's perspectives.
I definitely agree with that alternate universe theory, that like it makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely a pattern that we've seen throughout American history. Like this is not just exclusive to Thanksgiving. This is applicable to like literally almost every American holiday that we've seen, because there's always some dark truth that has been sugar coated and that has been covered up for the sake of portraying American history as this nice, happy narrative that we can all get along. And, America was always a country of cooperation and working together, and there was never any racist past or sexist past, and we can all just move on. And I think that it's important to recognize the foundation that America is built on. Otherwise, we're going to keep living this, as I said, falsified reality, and we're just going to keep living in ignorance. Like many people are or have been or have already rebranded Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. And I feel like taking stuff like that, they may not be able to, obviously reciprocate all those mistakes that have been made. But I think it's important to recognize history, and it's important to recognize what it means for our past. If we continue calling it Columbus Day, then you're living in this world where Columbus, has a day that we celebrate his so-called discovery of the Americas, versus Indigenous Peoples Day, we're celebrating the Indigenous people who not only lived there and thrived there and had like lives there, but also the ones that lost their lives to disease, to violence, to just having their culture erased and then being boxed into reservations for centuries after. And I think there needs to be that understanding of what the past was. And although we may not be able to atone for the different like sins of our ancestors, if you want to word it that way, there needs to be a way to acknowledge them at least and be able to learn from them. I mean, that's very cheesy, learning from history, but there needs to be a sort of as I said, an acknowledgement and the ability to recognize what your past was built on and how you can use that knowledge to change your future and to change the way that the future perceives the past.
Yeah, I think Madeline and Inika, those are both really interesting points. And I think, Madeline, especially to your point, that the way that we view holidays or the way that we view events evolves with time. I think that's absolutely true. And I also think, though, that different holidays mean different things to different groups. And I don't want to generalize and say that everybody in a certain group views a certain holiday one way, but I can imagine if I were an Indigenous person, for example, or of that ancestry, that Thanksgiving today would not have that same meaning of gratitude of family as it does for a lot of white Americans. And I think, again, back to Inika, like the idea of atoning for the sins of our ancestors, or however that's framed, I think a lot of that carries into the present and it still exists. If you look at the numbers of coronavirus cases on reservations, for example, and lack of access to healthcare, I think that's a huge problem. And it's kind of a modern day version of a lot of what we're talking about. And I think it's totally valid to say that for some groups, that might not be the perception of Thanksgiving. I think it's important to recognize that that's the history. But for people who are marginalized, I think it still carries that weight.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I kind of like to think of American holidays or national holidays, or actually just America as a whole, as kind of a nice fast food restaurant ad. You see the food, it looks so good on TV, and then when you get there, it's like, what is this? So, politicians, they say things that they never really follow through on. holidays are really good for a hot second until you really learn the history behind it. And yeah, that's just the story of America. And I think it's also part of the idea that Thanksgiving is really subjective. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different peoples. A lot of different people. Sorry, some people see it as maybe a birth of racist, sexist, or all the isms, kind of this oppressive culture, and then some people see it as a patriotic, celebratory act. So, yeah.
I mean, for me, I never really even saw Thanksgiving as like a holiday. It's not like in my culture, like Thanksgiving was never really a big deal. So for me, it was just a couple of days off, and I was like, I get to go visit my family sometime. I get to, just sit and watch the Macy's Day Parade. Actually, that's what I always look forward to every Thanksgiving. So I never really understood the history either way, like regardless if it was the nice tale that's strung to us in elementary school, or the reality, the harsh reality that it's actually based off of. It was never really something I considered to be a holiday. It was just a nice week and a half, gosh, I don't know what Thanksgiving I'm celebrating, a nice like couple days and a half off from school. And then soon I started to realize like that there is a significance behind these days. There's a significance behind Thanksgiving, there's a significance behind Columbus Day. And then as I started learning, I'm like, why are we celebrating this day? And I think that there needs to be, as I said before, there needs to be that understanding. And we need to be able to understand why we're celebrating these days as certain things. Like, why was Columbus Day framed as such a wonderful day for so long? Because it benefited America now, because it benefits this sort of facade that we have going on. And I think that stems for a lot, that's like a stem for a lot of issues, because this isn't just with holidays, this is going to be a series. And obviously with the series, there's more than just holidays. Like in the case of honoring Native Americans, there's like treaties that we've signed in like the 1800s that we've never honored, that basically state that like part of the Dakotas and like certain parts of like Wisconsin, I think, are just not our land. Like legally, they are not our land, and they're like treaties that we haven't honored for like that are like hundreds of years old or decades old. And I was reading something in history class, actually. It was about how like American government officials promised Native Americans, oh, like we won't touch your land. We're just going to put you in these reservations, and then, we'll let you be. And then how historically, like you can see in these passages, how we continue to break these promises, continue to make these lies, and eventually like we're in the situation where we are now, where our entire foundation as a nation is just lies or broken promises. And I think it needs to be like that considered, how our entire history has been manipulated, right? Even as kids, we've been manipulated into thinking that we have this nice, sugar coated history. And then as we grow older, we realize that sugar is like really rotten and it's bad. And then it's conflicting because, do I celebrate Thanksgiving or not? Like on Thanksgiving, should I be celebrating with family on a day that was characterized by many as like a day of violence, a day of white supremacy, a day of racism? Like, and then you have to consider how this holiday was created, like the foundation of it, and whether it should be a holiday at all, honestly.
Yeah, Inika, what your comment really raises for me is, and actually returning to this idea of American identity, is can there be a holiday that is truly about our national identity that everybody can buy into? Is there one that we see? Because I think the closest example I can think of is 4th of July, which is supposed to be about the founding of the country. But then I don't know if you've read Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and how, the freedoms that some have had in our country really run parallel and are, often reliant on the unfreedom of others. And I actually have been thinking about this as you were talking, and I really can't think of a holiday that I think would truly be representative of where our country is now, even if it reflected those values. And I think, the 4th of July is in a sense reflective of the Constitution, but also very aspirational. And we really need to do the work to get there. And so I'm curious to hear if you have any ideas on that very broad topic. And I know it's a big one, so we might not have time to get fully into it on today's episode.
America is a really, really big and diverse society. So I think that the idea of having a holiday that speaks to everybody would be idealistic because, obviously our historical holidays stand for oppressive actions towards certain minorities. And there are a lot of different cultures and a lot of different traditions that people have when they come to America from abroad. So having one holiday that speaks to everybody really isn't it. I don't really see it happening. I think that maybe the closest we get, like you said, was 4th of July, but then you think of Frederick Douglass's. I think you said to what to a slave is the 4th of July. Yes, so I think it's really a question of how close can we get to a holiday that speaks to everybody instead of do we have a holiday that will speak to every single minority and majority in our country.
Yeah, and if our holidays are solely lacking, then I see no better opportunity to start a new one. We could celebrate it amongst ourselves, tell your friends, make it a thing. But I think that a holiday about unities actually sounds fantastic. And I think that's the idea behind Thanksgiving, although it doesn't actually play out very well. And I think that like combining like the joyful spirit of Christmas with the patriotism of the 4th of July and the coming togetherness of Thanksgiving and a holiday like that would be like the most epic time of year, and a day off from school sounds awesome. But I don't think we would need an excuse to celebrate that other than just a coming together day, a unity day or something like that. Pick a day and any time of the year that you want an extra day off of school to celebrate just for the sake of celebrating. And that would be awesome.
Yeah, Madeline, I think that's an interesting idea. I think unity is something that our country is sorely lacking right now. Um, and at the same time, I wonder if such a holiday would feel falsified um, to certain groups. I I don't know. One thought that I had while Isaiah was talking was um, is a way to create unity, bringing more awareness to cultural holidays from certain ethnic groups. And I'm Jewish and I celebrate the Jewish holidays, but I also don't have a full understanding of other religions and their holidays. And even though I'm not going to celebrate them because I'm Jewish, I think understanding other people's culture and identities is a way to create unity. Um, and I think that's something that could be done in schools.
As you said, our country is lacking in unity, and I think that's definitely contributing to the two different realities, as Madeline said before, that like are basically competing for attention, right? You basically have one half of the country that wants to celebrate Thanksgiving as they've been taught like before 5th grade. Like they want this. I mean, I'm not blaming them. Obviously, it's much easier to just believe in a false reality and to simply let that reality be your guiding like light for Thanksgiving. Like it's a lot easier to ignore the atrocities of the past and simply move forward, or not even move forward, just stay where you are, because it's easier to digest. It's easier to go back and look in the past and see all these wonderful drawings of Native Americans and white settlers sitting around and holding hands and singing Kumbaya, because that's the reality we want to believe in. That's what we want to see our history textbooks have. And then you have the others that want to expose the realities of the past. But I feel like there needs to be a middle where you're not always talking about the past and the atrocities, but you're also able to work with others in creating a future that's not as divided and is more unified. Because even though the Thanksgiving of the past was not what we wanted it to be, hopefully we can make the Thanksgiving of the future what we want it to be. And there needs to be some sort of unity that we find. This country is it gets more polarized every day, honestly. This election has only exacerbated the issue because now we have people that do not believe in the election results. Like now we're in a fight over democracy, which is what many people consider a characteristic of America. So this is no longer just the stars and stripes. This is also like the flag itself. Like this is the very fabric of America that is at stake here. And we need to get our stuff together. Like we need to be able to, sew the fabric back together and get back to repairing what we consider a melting pot of a country. Because if we continue at this rate, there's not going to be anything left for us to unify, right? We're in a very precarious situation where kids like us, we're growing up in a time where, your neighbors are people who you cannot share a Thanksgiving with because, you don't know who they are. You don't know their political beliefs. And honestly, political beliefs these days can be pretty scary. They can be pretty fatal. And it's time where we don't have to put them aside, but we have to understand that there are disparities and there are ways that we can fix those disparities, or at least see across the aisle per se, and understand that unity is it's achievable if we are willing to make it achievable, right? If you are constantly living in ignorance or living in the lack of ignorance, you will never be able to look across the aisle and see the other person. You only see what they stand for or what they believe in, which of course are very defining characteristics of a person. But above all, we are not like Republicans or Democrats or independents, we're people. And I think we need to understand that these labels are tearing us apart as a country. And to unify each other, we need to see each other as a base level of just people, and then we can work from there.
Yeah, and I think that this year, Thanksgiving, as we mentioned earlier, especially this year, it needs to be about celebration and not continuing to tear each other apart. So, even though the historical sense is extremely important in the history of Thanksgiving and how and why we celebrate it, I think that this year, Thanksgiving is not about that. It's not about the violence. It's not about the positive effects. It's not about the past. It's about right now. And right now, what we really need is comfort. And there's nothing more comforting than the feeling that we have during the holiday of Thanksgiving, which should be what is highlighted about Thanksgiving as opposed to the historical sense. And if we just continue on with that, I definitely see a redefining, of Thanksgiving. And that could be a wonderful thing and a great, huge step into unifying America, which sounds unachievable and unrealistic, but we can get there. I believe in us.
Yeah, the one day of the year that we are not completely tearing each other apart. It's kind of like a long-awaited breather that everybody needs to take because, right now where we're going, this division, it's not going to go anywhere well. So I think we just need to. Thanksgiving this year represents the one day of the year that we could just take a break and really encourage the unity amongst our friends, neighbors, family, etc.
Yeah, as I typed in the chat, just for everyone listening, I said hashtag redefine Thanksgiving 2020. And I mean, obviously that does not mean to erase the past, but to almost start over. You know, Thanksgiving is a day where we can find, you know, solace in each other as Americans and as people of the world, and we can unify each other under, you know, the sky or whatever you want to believe in, and just enjoy each other's presence and be thankful for what we have, be thankful for what we're able to give, and just let that be the definition of Thanksgiving without having to have a racially charged past behind it, or having that be the foundation. We can change the foundation. We can rebuild the foundation. We don't need to stick with the racist past when we can create a not racist future. And I think redefining Thanksgiving can, I don't want it to be seen as trying to, you know, forget the past, but I see it as a way of honoring those who have been erased for so long.
I would add, I think as part of that redefining and moving forward, a lot of learning needs to happen. And for Thanksgiving this year, I think that's really something that I want to focus on for myself and also with my family. How do we understand this history? And how does it inform our vision of the present and what we want our society to look like going forward, and then how we can work towards that?
Amazing. I think we close there. That was incredible. I feel very fortunate to be part of that conversation. I'm going to stop the recording.